He was just a kid in a bandana. But in his eyes, I saw the ghost of a soldier. The first time Jake Monroe walked into the schoolyard dressed like Rambo, nobody laughed. Not because they respected him. No, far from it. They were just confused. It was Hero Day at Roosevelt Middle School, a themed celebration meant to honor everyday champions, firefighters, nurses, local veterans. Most kids showed up in makeshift capes or police hats. Jake, on the other hand, had carefully wrapped a red bandana around his forehead, wore an old green tank top, camo pants he'd found in the attic, and boots that didn't quite fit. A toy knife in a cardboard sheath dangled from his belt, and black streaks of face paint ran down his cheeks. But it wasn't a joke to him. To Jake, this wasn't just a costume. It was a tribute to someone real, to someone who came home with invisible scars and never talked about them. To his father. Staff Sergeant Richard Monroe, retired U.S. Marine and two-time Bronze Star recipient, had returned from Afghanistan 6 years ago and hadn't said a full sentence in public since. He worked nights stocking shelves at a 24-hour hardware store and spent his days locked in his garage, chain-smoking and listening to old Springsteen records. Jake remembered the man who used to lift him on his shoulders and call him Soldier. But that version of his father had faded long ago. So when Jake saw First Blood on TV late one night, when he saw the rage, the survival, the silence of Rambo, he felt something click. He didn't just see a movie character, he saw his dad. And he wanted the world to understand, even if it meant becoming the misunderstood himself. The school bell rang, and Jake stood on the steps outside Roosevelt, waiting. His hands were trembling slightly, hidden inside his fingerless gloves. He knew what was coming, teachers eyeing him, students whispering. But he didn't care. He had practiced his stare in the mirror the night before. He had memorized the line. They drew first blood, not me. Inside the school, things unraveled quickly. Mrs. Kimball, his homeroom teacher, stopped him at the door. "Jake Monroe," she said, crossing her arms. "What on earth are you wearing?" He opened his mouth to explain. About Hero Day, about his father, about why Rambo mattered. But the words got stuck somewhere between his throat and his chest. "This isn't a war zone," she continued. "You're scaring the other kids." It's not real," Jake mumbled. "It's Rambo." Kimball looked at him like he'd just said he worshipped the devil. "Rambo? That violent mercenary? Jake, this is school. Take that off, now." His classmates laughed. Some pulled out phones. And in that moment, Jake wasn't a tribute. He was a target. The principal's office was cold and sterile, filled with silent judgment. Mr. Drexler didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. He just handed Jake a pink slip and told him he was suspended for threatening visual conduct and inappropriate attire. "You're lucky we're not calling the authorities," Drexler said. "That fake knife might have looked real to the wrong person." Jake sat motionless. He didn't cry. He didn't protest. He just clenched his fists around the paper, like Rambo might have done. But the worst came later that afternoon, when his father found out. Richard Monroe stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing the same plate for 5 straight minutes as Jake explained what had happened. He didn't say a word, didn't yell, didn't hit. But he looked at Jake in a way that made him feel like a dishonor to the name. "You think this is a game?" his father finally whispered, voice gravelly from years of smoking and silence. "You think paint and boots make you a man?" "I was trying to honor you," Jake snapped, choking back tears. "I thought you'd be proud." Richard's hands froze in the sink. Then, like lightning splitting sky, the plate shattered in his grip. "You don't know the first thing about pride," he said. And he walked out. Jake spent that night on the back porch, knees pulled to his chest, the red bandana still tied tight. The toy knife sat next to him like a forgotten memory. Above, the sky stretched wide and gray, the moon hidden behind layers of clouds. He didn't know that across town. Someone else was watching the same sky. Someone who had worn that bandana for real, who had become a symbol, even when no one asked him to. Sylvester Stallone was in town filming a commercial for a fitness brand. He had no idea a 13-year-old had just been suspended for dressing up as him. Not yet, but he would. And when he did, he wouldn't just sit back. He'd show up, and everything would change. In the early morning, a black SUV pulled up to the Monroe household. The door opened. A boot hit the ground. A familiar voice asked, "Is Jake home?" It wasn't a teacher. It wasn't the police. It was him. The man standing in front of Jake was larger than life. And yet, he spoke with the quiet gravity of someone who had lived through storms and didn't need to prove it. "I'm not here as a movie star," Stallone said. "I'm here because I heard what happened, and it hit me harder than I expected." Jake blinked. He wasn't sure if this was real. A day ago, he was the weird kid suspended for dressing like a forgotten action hero. Now, that very hero was sitting on his porch. Richard Monroe stood in the background, arms crossed. His jaw was tight, unreadable. He hadn't said a word since Stallone stepped out of that black SUV, but he hadn't left either. Stallone turned to Jake. "Why Rambo?" The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Jake looked down at his scuffed boots, then up at the man who had once drawn first blood on the silver screen. "Because Rambo doesn't talk unless he has to," Jake said softly. "Because he gets pushed around, and he doesn't fight back until it's too much. Because people don't understand him." He paused. "And because he reminds me of my dad." Stallone's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. He nodded once, deep and slow, like someone who understood exactly what those words meant. "You know," he said, "the first Rambo wasn't about war, it was about coming home, and what that does to a man." Behind them, Richard shifted slightly. Jake's voice cracked. "He doesn't talk to me anymore. Not really. I thought maybe if I showed people what I see in him, they'd stop laughing. They'd understand." Stallone leaned forward. "Let me tell you something, Jake. You were braver than most grown men by showing up like that, and you weren't wrong to see a hero in your father." That night, after Stallone left, something unexpected happened. Richard Monroe opened the door to Jake's room. He didn't say a word, but he dropped something on Jake's desk, a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. Jake unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, dated July 22, 2009, Kandahar Province. It read, "Jake, if I don't make it back, I want you to know this. You were my reason for everything. The only thing that made sense in a world that stopped making sense. I hope you grow up brave. Not the kind of brave that holds a gun, the kind that tells the truth, that stands up for someone even when you're scared. And if I do make it back and I'm not the same, just know I'll still be loving you the same way. Even if I can't always say it. Dad." Jake read the letter 3 times before crying. Not the quiet tears of frustration, but the full-body, heaving kind that release everything trapped inside a boy who's tried too hard to be tough for too long. The next morning, the media found out. Someone had leaked a blurry photo of Stallone standing outside the Monroe house. News vans parked down the street. The story exploded online. Sylvester Stallone defends suspended teen who dressed as Rambo for Hero Day. There were hashtags, there were debates, and there was backlash. Principal Drexler called an emergency school board meeting. He wasn't pleased. "This school will not be turned into a circus," he said during the closed session. "We do not condone violence, real or fictional, as a form of expression." But not everyone agreed. One teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, who taught literature and had served in Iraq, stood up. "With all due respect, sir, dressing as Rambo is not an act of violence. It's an act of remembrance. That boy wasn't glorifying war, he was trying to understand it." Her words spread just as fast as Stallone's visit. Meanwhile, Jake returned to school. Not in a bandana, not in camouflage, but in his regular clothes. Still, the hallway felt different, quieter. Eyes didn't roll, phones didn't rise to record. His locker was decorated with red ribbons. A sticky note read, "Real heroes don't need permission." Maggie, his best friend, walked up beside him and nudged his shoulder. "You broke the internet," she grinned. Jake blushed. "It was Stallone who did that." "Yeah, well, you gave him a reason." But things weren't fully healed. That night, Jake walked into the garage. His dad was there, sitting in the same chair, listening to Springsteen. Only now, the door was open. Jake took a breath. "Did you really write that letter?" Richard took a long drag from his cigarette, then stubbed it out. "Yeah," he said, voice hoarse. "Just never had the guts to give it to you." Jake sat on the floor across from him. "You don't have to talk if it's hard," he said. "But I'm here, when you're ready." For a moment, Richard didn't respond. Then he reached into a small box beside his chair and pulled out a folded piece of red cloth. It was the original bandana, the real one, from Afghanistan. He handed it to Jake without a word, and that was enough. Minor twist, midpoint revelation. The school receives a formal letter from Stallone's foundation, offering to speak at an upcoming assembly about what Rambo really meant, and the difference between glorifying violence and honoring resilience. But Principal Drexler refuses. That's when Jake does something no one expects. He writes an open letter to the school board and the internet. Jake's letter goes viral. It ends with these words: "You don't have to like Rambo, but maybe try listening to the kids who do." The next morning, there's a letter waiting in the mailbox, from Stallone, stamped in gold foil. Jake had never gone viral before. He didn't even have social media until Maggie made him an account the night his open letter took off. But by morning, thousands of people had shared it. Veterans, students, parents, even celebrities. News anchors read it on live television. The part that struck everyone was near the end. Some kids wear capes because they see heroes on movie screens. I wore a bandana because I saw one sitting at my kitchen table every night, silent and hurting. Suddenly, the narrative had changed. Jake wasn't the strange kid mimicking an outdated action hero. He was the voice of every child who wished their silent parent would speak. The symbol of every misunderstood tribute. The spark that turned mockery into meaning. But not everyone celebrated. Principal Drexler doubled down. The school sent an official statement. Roosevelt Middle School maintains a zero-tolerance policy for any symbolism perceived as promoting violence. While we support student expression, this particular case violated clear guidelines. To many, it sounded like bureaucracy with a badge. To Jake, it felt like a door slammed shut. But Stallone wasn't done. He called. "Kid," he said, "you've done more with that letter than I ever did with 5 Rambo films. But now, I think it's time they hear from me." A week later, the school announced an emergency assembly, mandatory attendance. Rumors swirled, students whispered in hallways, teachers exchanged uncertain glances. When the curtains on the auditorium stage parted, the crowd went silent. There he stood, Sylvester Stallone. No spotlight, no podium. Just the man, in his gravelly voice, holding Jake's bandana in one hand and something else in the other. A box. He looked around the room, taking in every face. "I didn't come here to be clapped for," he said. "I came here because a boy tried to honor his father and got punished for it." Some students clapped anyway. Others held their breath. "I've played a lot of roles in my life," Stallone continued. "But none stuck like John Rambo. Not because of the muscles or the explosions, but because Rambo was broken. Like a lot of real men who come home and don't know how to live anymore." He turned toward the faculty. "You see a costume. I see a kid trying to say, 'I love you,' in the only language he knew." He opened the box. Inside was his original headband from First Blood, signed, folded with reverence. He handed it to Jake. "Now it's yours." The crowd rose. Some cried, some cheered. But one man, Richard Monroe, stood at the back of the room, motionless, until Stallone looked directly at him and saluted. Richard's body stiffened, his eyes welled. He saluted back. For the first time in years. After the assembly, everything changed. The school reversed Jake's suspension and renamed Hero Day to Courage Day, an annual event to honor not just public service, but personal bravery. Richard Monroe didn't return to silence. He started volunteering at a local vet support group. Jake began writing more. He'd found his voice. But the world had one more twist to offer. A casting director for an upcoming docudrama about veterans reached out to Stallone. They wanted Jake to be part of it, not as an actor, but as the writer. "They want your story," Stallone told him. "The real one." Jake didn't believe it. "Why me?" "Because," Stallone said, "you reminded the world that heroes don't always come back whole, but the kids who love them anyway, they're the ones who put them back together." The film is approved. Jake writes the first pages, and in the final scene he adds a line for the actor playing his father. "You don't have to say it, Dad. I already know." The production team loves it, but Jake knows exactly what it really means. On a quiet Sunday morning, Jake stands by a tree in the school courtyard, newly planted, with a plaque that reads, "In honor of the silent heroes and the voices who remind us to listen." Behind him, Richard approaches, holding something in his hand. It's an envelope. Inside, his first reply letter. It was a warm spring afternoon when Jake opened the envelope. His father had handed it to him quietly, without a word, just a nod, and a hand on his shoulder. That touch, small as it was, said more than any sentence could. Jake sat under the tree the school had planted, its roots still young, the soil freshly turned. He could smell the bark, feel the wind brushing against the plaque at its base. The envelope was plain, no stamp, no return address, just his name, Jake. He unfolded the letter slowly, the paper creased and careful. "Son, I should have said something a long time ago. Maybe I thought silence would keep you safe. Maybe I didn't know how to be a father anymore. But when I saw you on that stage, next to that man, holding your ground, I realized I didn't need to protect you. You were already strong. You didn't dress like Rambo to make a scene. You did it to say something I didn't have the guts to, and for that, I'm proud. I'm proud of the man you're becoming, and I'm sorry for the one I stopped being. Love you, kid." Dad Jake folded the letter and pressed it against his chest. He didn't cry this time. He just breathed. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt right-sized. The film shoot began 2 months later. It was called The Quiet Return, a hybrid of documentary and dramatization. Jake's words opened the script. His father sat in the front row of the premiere, wearing a clean button-down shirt and the same boots he'd worn in Kandahar. Stallone made a surprise appearance, sitting beside them like family. When the final scene played, there was no applause, just silence. A silence that meant something. In the scene, the boy playing Jake walks up to his father, puts a red bandana in his hands, and whispers, "You don't have to say it. I already know." It was the line Jake had written. But now, as he watched it unfold on the screen, he realized something deeper. He didn't always know. He hadn't always been sure. But he had chosen to believe, to love anyway, and that made all the difference. After the film, a reporter asked Jake if he wanted to be a screenwriter. He shrugged. "I just wanted my dad to see me." Richard, standing nearby, said without hesitation, "I always did." Later that night, back home, Jake and Richard sat outside again. Same porch, same sky. Only this time, Richard was the one holding the bandana. He looked at his son and said something Jake would remember for the rest of his life. "You didn't remind me of Rambo, Jake. You reminded me of myself. The me I forgot how to be." From then on, every year on Courage Day, Jake wore the original bandana, just for a few minutes. Not to make a statement, not for attention, just as a quiet tribute to the man who came home, and the boy who never gave up on him. He was just a kid in a bandana. But in his eyes, I saw the ghost of a soldier. Now, he was no ghost. He was standing right there, alive, healing, whole. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is answer a letter he never thought he'd read again. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means everything to us, and we hope this story moved you as much as it moved us. If it did, please consider leaving a comment, sharing the video, and subscribing to the channel, because powerful stories deserve to be heard. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the impact of one small act of courage.